We are recording the interview of Thomas Eric Schmall. This interview is being conducted by David Morse from the Wright State University Veteran Voices Project. This interview is being recorded at the Holiday Inn in Fairborn, Ohio. It is 4:38 p.m., June 7th, 2019. All right. Let's start off, and you go by Eric.
That's correct.
So, Eric, let's start off with when and where you were born.
I was born June 2nd, 1948 in Louisville, Kentucky.
All right. And who are your parents?
My father's name was Tommy Breckenridge Schmall. My mother was Betty Jane Harrison. Both were born in Louisville.
Okay.
And their families had been in Louisville for several generations.
All right. All right. So I have to ask you real quick, are you a UK fan or a Louisville fan?
I'm a graduate of U of L, so say no more.
Okay. All right. What were your parents' occupation?
My father was a purchasing agent for General Electric. GE had a very big appliance park in Louisville, built in the early 50s, and he joined and spent his whole career with GE. My mother was a preschool teacher and did that for most of her career. And they were both only children, and so I grew up with no aunts, no uncles, and no cousins. We're a very small family.
I gotcha. Now, did you have any siblings?
My parents adopted two girls who were sisters when I was, excuse me, I was 9 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And these two young ladies, yeah, thank you. Although they were never formally adopted, grew up to be my sisters, we always said. And they came from a family named Matthews, a very poor family. My parents adopted them from a Catholic orphanage. My younger sister passed away several years ago. My other younger sister is still living in Louisville. And so I grew up with two siblings, but they were fostered, officially fostered sisters, not ever formally adopted.
Okay. Now, did either one of your sisters or your parents or anybody ever served in the military?
My dad served in World War II in the Army Air Corps. He joined in 43. He was going to be a pilot. He was down in Arkansas. He had in one of his early training flights, the runway froze over unexpectedly as he was making his final approach. The tower knew nothing about this. When he landed, his plane flipped over, and he had a concussion, which disqualified him from becoming a pilot. So he went on in as an enlisted man and became a radio operator, and then later a medic, and he served in the South Pacific. And excuse me, served up into, well, he actually was part of the occupation of Japan and served near Hiroshima, and became a lifelong advocate for civil defense in Louisville, especially during the Cold War. He actually built a fallout shelter in our basement. He was, number one, worried about, the possibility of nuclear war. Excuse me. And he had seen what had happened as a consequence of a nuclear attack on a city, and he was convinced that we had that as a very real danger in the late 50s, early 60s. So he said, we're going to build a fallout shelter. He became a big advocate, went all over the city talking about civil defense and how to prepare for it and so forth. Worked as a volunteer for the Louisville government in that capacity and so forth. But I grew up, all my dad's friends were veterans. They'd served in the South Pacific or they'd served in Europe. And it was a culture, as I grew up in, like a lot of kids in that era, that, well, everybody served, and the expectation is someday, I might have to too, and, John Wayne and all the rest of that type of thing. When I read and later saw the movie, Born on the 4th of July, about Ron Kovich, who later became he was a Vietnam veteran. He was wounded in Vietnam, became paraplegic from his wounds, and then became an anti-war activist and so forth. And he talked about that childhood. It was very similar to mine.
Okay.
Growing up with the idea of, joining the military someday and serving, and how that went south on a lot of guys in Southeast Asia and so forth. But my dad was always proud of his service. And even later in life, I think it changed him so much when he went overseas and came back, and all that he experienced in that just was profound. And to his dying day, was always very proud and would always talk about serving, what it meant to him and so forth. So it had a big impact on me.
Wow. So before you ended up joining the service, what were you doing?
Well, I went to a college preparatory high school in Louisville, St. Xavier, and then went to University of Louisville, and that's when at that time the war was really cranking up. In '66, when I graduated from St. X and started my freshman year at U of L, the draft level had reached something like 300,000 men a month or something. It was going absolutely nuts as far as everybody's going to go, if you're healthy. And yes, sure, you're going to have a student deferment, but this war is not going to end anytime soon. And so my dad was telling me, you face the facts, you're going to get a student deferment for 4 years, but don't kid yourself, this war is not going to be over. And when you get out, they're going to come sweep you up like every other eligible young man. And he said, I'll tell you this. He said, don't go in as an enlisted man. He said, that's what I did. He said, one lesson I learned was go in as an officer. At least they'll pay you better for being shot at. I said, well, that sounds good to me. And I was, so when I joined U of L, or entered into it, I went with the ROTC. They had an Air Force ROTC unit. I signed up thinking, I will protect myself, and I didn't have any objection to being in the military either because of my family history. And even if the war were to end, it's like, well, I think the Air Force is a noble thing to get into, and I'd be proud to serve. Don't know that I'd make a career of it, but why not? So my second year in the ROTC, they had such a crying need for people to join the ROTC across the nation. In '67, as I understood it, the enrollment in ROTCs across the nation dropped pretty dramatically. As opposition to the war grew. And so my understanding was the services decided, well, we need to amp up encouragement to join the ROTC, especially through scholarship programs. So they offered me at the end of my freshman year, they said, if you take this qualifying test, and based on your grades, we'll give you a free ride on the rest of your undergraduate work. Now, U of L at that time was not part of a state system. It was a private school and very expensive to go to. And I took loans out for my freshman year, and they were substantial. And so I said, well, I'm planning to stay with you guys anyway. If you want to pay for it, sounds like a great deal. They said, well, now wait a minute. This was going to mean 6 years of active duty instead of 4, and like 8 years of inactive reserve or maybe even active reserve, depending on how the war goes. So this is going to be a big deal. I'm fine. Let's go for it. So I was granted the scholarship and received pay monthly from them as for an offset for student expenses. They paid for my books. They paid for my tuition. And they said, now, if you wash out, you are an airman basic, and you're coming with us right away into the military, active duty. And I said, I understand. So I don't want that. So I will be, faithful to studies and living up to my side of the thing, and which was no problem. I was a good student. So I was commissioned in May of 1970. And in my senior year, I decided, I think I might want to become a lawyer. I studied political science as my major, and somehow got this idea, maybe law school would be a good idea. And I asked the Air Force, would you mind if I wait on active duty while I go get a law degree? And they were like, no, that's fine with us. You'll come in as a captain, go do your thing. As it turned out, what that desire to join the law, go to law school was really a masking of the fact that I just didn't want to leave school. I didn't want to go out in the world. I spent about a week in law school and absolutely hated it. I loathed every moment of my time in there, and woke up, so to speak, after the first week, saying, why am I doing this to myself? So I went to the dean of the law school, said I made a terrible mistake. He said, people make them all the time in law school. He said, we lose 2/3 of you guys anyway. That's just natural attrition in law school. He said, you're fine standing with us. Come back if you ever want to. I called up the Air Force, said, I'll change my mind. They're like, well, it's aces with us. We'll call you back soon. Well, in February, they called me and said, come to Denver. We're ready to bring you into in the active service, and we'll start teaching you there. So, instead of going right into active duty, it was delayed by my fear of leaving home, I think. And then after that brief interlude, it was like, okay, it's time to go. And so off we went. And I went to Denver. They determined that based on my undergraduate work, that I'd be good in intelligence. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. And a lot of analytical stuff, and so they said, we think we might put you in photo intelligence, where you'll interpret photo reconnaissance stuff and write up reports on, what we're seeing from our reconnaissance planes and satellites and all. I said, well, that sounds pretty interesting. I failed the sight test. I didn't know that I didn't have a good enough depth of perception to be able to read stereo film, film that would come out in two different angles. So when you peered down through the right lenses, it looks three-dimensional. And something about the way my eyes didn't work right. They said, this would not be a good thing for you. You can't perceive it well enough to be good at that. We're going to make you an air intelligence officer. I said, well, what's that? So, well, you'll just do more interpretive work based on what the photo interpreters come up with, and you'll be briefing people, commanders and crews and so forth. I said, all right, let's do that. So in Denver at Lowry Air Force Base, I spent 6 months being trained in air intelligence, as they called it, and graduated in July of '71 from there, and was immediately assigned, as most of my classmates were, to Southeast Asia. Now this came in as a great shock, because Nixon had come into office inaugurated in 1969, and one of his biggest steps was to Vietnamize the war, as he called it, which was he was astute enough to know that the only way to really reduce the pressure, political pressure from young people was be to eliminate the draft and to pull our troops, our ground troops out and try to Vietnamize them and turn more of the war over to the Vietnamese. And so he dramatically started withdrawing U.S. armed or ground forces from South Vietnam, and purposely then changed the draft system to a lottery system. So by reducing the number of troops that were being conscripted to go into Vietnam, he relaxed the number of people that had to be called up, and then by introducing the lottery system, made it more, well, I don't think it was necessarily more just, but it made it more predictable about whether or not you were going to be called into service. When that happened, I mean, all this occurs while I'm in the later years of my ROTC and my training with the Air Force. And so while I'm in Denver, watching the news and all this stuff, even though the protests and so forth against Nixon and the war were still very, very volatile, it was clear that he was turning the page on Vietnam as far as our involvement, of the vulnerability of our ground troops. And in my mind, like I think the rest of my classmates, was like, well, the war is going to wind down, and there's, our chance of ever going to Southeast Asia is negligible now, we told ourselves. Well, we all get our orders cut for bases in Vietnam and Thailand. And we're like, well, what is this Vietnamization? They said, oh, no. What has not been in the news is we're reopening bases for the Air Force in Thailand particularly. We're closing them in Vietnam, but we're moving everybody to Thailand because the Vietnamization program will not work unless we have a much stronger presence of the U.S. Air Force there. And I'm like, well, I missed that part. And they said, well, you haven't talked a lot about that because we don't need near as many ground troops to support the Air Corps in there, but we need a lot more guys going. So bases that had been closed in Thailand were reopening, and we were massively shifting our presence in our air strength because the Vietnamese were not at all ready to support their war from the air. They did not have near the aircraft or the expertise and so forth. So they were going to be very reliant upon us to suppress the communist supply lines, and also to bring in close combat air support for the ARVN, as they were called, the Army of Republic of Vietnam troops. So air war is going up. We're dropping the Army, so about our Army forces and so forth, and Navy forces to some degree, but not aircraft. Naval aircraft presence stays strong in the Gulf of Tonkin. So in August of '71, I landed at Nakhon Phanom, and I was assigned as a combat crew briefing officer with the Wing Intelligence Group, which is part of the headquarters squadron, and right away, I mean, they put me into, I want to say, there was no apprenticeship of any kind, or very little, and they taught me, okay, this is what you're going to do on a daily basis, and that was to brief, to prepare for, to do the analysis of what's going on. I mean, as up to date as you possibly be, given situation reports that are coming in over teletype 24 hours a day about changing ground situations and so forth, and where anti-aircraft things are and threats and so forth, and all the changing stuff, so that when you brief air crews who are going out there to either rescue pilots or to support troops, they know where the bad guys are, where the good guys are. They know how to get in safely and get out safely. They know where to parachute into if they have to get, if they have to abandon the aircraft, and that's up to you. If you don't do your work right, these guys can be in serious trouble. And guess what? It's not your butt that's on the line, it's theirs. So think about that.
Wow. Now, is this Is this just Air Force intelligence, or is this military intelligence?
It's intelligence that was gathered from all sorts of sources. You know, electronic sources. We had electronic devices that were dropped into what's called the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which was all up and down in Laos and in Vietnam, so that we could detect troop movements. We could detect trucks moving. We could detect all sorts of ways electronically. We had reconnaissance aircraft that were taking pictures of stuff constantly, so there was that. We had human intelligence. People coming back from missions were telling us what they saw. We had debriefings from the ground troops about what they encountered. So it was all come in different from different sources, and you had to sort of say, well, what's the bottom line here? What's really going on? On the post at NKP, we had this one unit called the Task Force Alpha, which was the gatherer of much of that information. The electronic information came in there, was literally beamed into Task Force Alpha antenna, which then was interpreted by those people and saying, okay, here's what it looks like as far as these different units of the North Vietnamese Army moving troops and trucks and tanks in this area, and so therefore we should target certain areas tonight for the whatever we're going to go bomb or whatever. And that would be funneled over to us from right on base, and then other stuff would come to us. Well, let me think about that. Much of that stuff got sent to Saigon, to Tan Son Nhut, the headquarters, and then brought to us. It's funny that people on the post didn't tell us. It had to go to headquarters and then come back to us. And some of it would not be sent to us. This turned out to be a huge paradox to me. Some of it was so sensitive and so classified that they couldn't tell us. Well, they could tell us, the intel people, but they said the pilots didn't have clearance, so they couldn't be told. Now, when I heard this, I had some problems with it. I said, boy, say this again. They said, well, the pilots, they don't have top secret code word clearance. I'm like, yes. So you can't tell them this information. I said, but if we don't tell them, they might die. It's like, yes, but at least we protected the intelligence. Now, I'd read Catch-22 when I was in college, and this was one of the first emerging themes of Joseph Heller could have written this part. I mean, this made no sense to me. So, I will admit that if I found out something that was going on, then it was, somehow not, it was top secret, I may let that slip in my briefing without saying anything to the pilots about, rumor has it that you don't go here, just between us girls, because it's like, come on. So anyway, but I will say this, because it was, I believe it was true, and I still believe it's true. We were told, and when I joined this intel group, that we were the best in all of Southeast Asia. Now, this was not just our humble opinion. We were told from people who were at headquarters in Tan Son Nhut in Saigon, very top parts of the military chain of command there, had heard about us, had witnessed our brand or our devotion to our responsibilities and the professionalism of the group that I had joined. And we had this very high standard. And I was told that early on, you're joining an elite group here. You might not know that, but we're going to hold you, to very high standards here, because we're going to maintain this reputation at all cost. Not only because it's nice to have, but because of that, we minimize our losses as far as giving bad intel to our pilots who might get shot down trying to rescue somebody, or might parachute into the wrong area because we didn't know any better about what was safe and what wasn't, even though that was very fluid and changing all the time. So I became quickly, devoted to saying, well, I will do my part to maintain this while I'm here. And And because we had a continuous succession of people who would be finishing their tours and we'd be getting new guys in, we impress upon them the same thing. If you don't perform well, we'll toss you out. We'll find something else for you to do, but you're not going to tarnish our reputation because you're a slacker or you don't care or whatever. I think we maintained that pretty well, and I had the experience at one point when I was rotated down to on a temporary basis into Vietnam during what was called the Easter Offensive in 1972. One of our squadrons was sent down there because it looked like South Vietnam was about to collapse under a massive military push by the North Vietnamese beginning in April of 72. And I mean, it was going to be close. And for about 2 or 3 months, we had to focus like crazy. The Air Force had to focus like crazy on shifting all of our ordnance and flights, or a huge number of them, into South Vietnam versus Laos, where the secret war was going on, so to speak, to try to reverse this near collapse. So they took a whole squadron of our fighters down there, and once the fighters got down there, the guys in the squadron said, intelligence group down here at Benoit is god-awfully bad. We need our guys. We're used to excellence, and it ain't here. So I was picked to go down and brief that squadron. Say, we want our own intel guy that we trust, and not these guys. And so I was the first to go for several weeks, and then I rotated out, and we had another guy from our shop, and as long as our squadron was down there, they insisted, we want our own intel guys, because these other guys they're just pathetic. So that reinforced to me in a real way that the rumor, I guess you could say, or the reputation that our intel group had was true. And I have to say, with my colleagues, the briefing officers I met down there who were part of the Benoit group, I thought they were. It's like, what is? I don't want to say what's wrong with you. They weren't an elite group. They didn't have a culture of an elite group. I couldn't really fault them but it was night and day difference, I thought, in terms of their discipline and focus, the security even was just, like, what is going on here? So,
do you think it might have been the mission, or
I mean, in their particular case, I think one of the hallmarks of the 56 Intel Group, because of the Wings mission, was focused on search and rescue. I mean, that to me, we did a lot of interdiction strikes using these old aircraft from the Korean War. We had no jets on the base at all. Right. So we're using helicopters and these A-1 fighters from the Korean War, and these AC-119 gunships to support the idea of suppressing the traffic coming down the Ho Chi Minh Trail, as well as supporting the Laotian troops, the Royal Laotian troops, in their fight against the Pathet Lao in Laos. Now, we had sworn as a country that we would not have ground troops in Laos because Laos was claiming it was neutral. But we were bombing the living hell out of Laos for years, and I think the public only had the dimmest, if any, awareness of how much we were bombing Laos and Cambodia from an air support standpoint. And so when we weren't rescuing people, which was our primary mission, then we were taking our resources, saying, all right, go in for close-in combat support of these Laotian troops here in the part of Laos, in northern Laos and southern Laos. Maybe occasionally into Vietnam, but not until that offensive happened did we really swing our forces that far south. Occasionally Cambodia, but the idea was mainly we're here positioned and ready to pull the trigger at a moment's notice for search and rescue. and make that, and it was like that was the holiest thing we did, and it somehow had a redemptive aspect to it. I think that was like, so we're not here just killing people endlessly, although obviously we were in our combat support and so forth, but we were only there because we were the closest base to North Vietnam. So if somebody went down, one of our aircraft went down in North Vietnam, it was us who was going to go get them. So it was like, there's something to talk about. And then, of course, anybody who went down in Laos, anywhere, we were going to go get them. It could, on a rare occasion, be true in South Vietnam, but it would have to be pretty desperate. People in Da Nang Air Base in Vietnam were normally the ones from the northern part of South Vietnam were the ones who were going to get guys picked up there. But occasionally we'd have to go too because they didn't have enough aircraft or enough resources to do it. So we'd be called in to the northern part of South Vietnam on occasion to support search and rescues there, and all of North Vietnam. So when things got heated up, like when we decided to, Nixon decided to, punish North Vietnam for its offensive move in the South, we started mining Haiphong Harbor in May of 1972. Well, and sending B-52s up to bomb Hanoi and the like. Occasionally we're going to lose, a big aircraft with lots of crew members. It's going to be us to go get them. So that was, I would say, that was always the most important thing to us, to be successful in pulling these guys out and not losing any of our guys in the process.
Honestly, the only story I ever heard of NKP prior to this reunion is the story of a rescued pilot.
Okay.
Pilot, and I can't exactly remember the source of it, but I vaguely remember pilot saying he got rescued, got picked up, dropped off at NKP, and he was told, "You were never here," and then was released back to his unit.
Yeah. Yeah, they called it, they always, called us a secret base. Part of the reason I was told was because of this Task Force Alpha unit that was getting all this electronic intelligence from the trail where we had those sensors, and we didn't want the bad guys to know too much about it because supposedly the northeast part of Thailand where we were was I don't want to call it a hotbed of communist insurrection, but there were more communists there than were in the rest of Thailand. A lot of it was, we're on the Mekong River. We're 9 miles from the Mekong River. It's very easy for the Pathet Lao, the bad guys in Laos, to cross the river and do mischief if they want. And it was like, let's just not broadcast too much about NKP and what we do here. Let's keep it on the QT. Bob Hope came once or twice. They never, but they would always say, we'll do that on occasion, but we don't need that spotlight on, NKP, what's that? Tell us more. No. If they would show snippets, I can't say this is absolutely true, but if they would show snippets at home, at Christmas time or after Christmas, here's Bob Hope training our troops and so forth. Well, yeah, I'll show him in Vietnam, but let's not talk, or Utapao down in southern Thailand where the B-52s are. That's okay, but let's not say much about this little tiny nowhere outpost that's way up there and doing some really important work that we just don't need a lot of glare from. So yeah, and because when I went, when they first told me about it, I had never heard of it. Nobody I ever knew had heard of it. It's like, what is this going to be? It was, so yeah, it was very different that way.
Wow. So I want to go back a little bit.
Sure.
To actually ROTC. So ROTC back when Vietnam and stuff was going on. Did you guys have kind of like a basic training, that type of course?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, we had classes. You had to take a certain number of classes with ROTC for credit, and they were actually the first year, everybody at the university had to take either some type of physical training course or join the ROTC. That was, one thing you could do. See, the first 2 years in ROTC had no commitment on the part of the students. If you wanted to test it out, there's no commitment, okay? It's like, if you want to quit after the second year, we're all friends. Maybe you learned a little something about the Air Force. Go with God. But after that, you were sworn in. Junior year, you took the oath. And in my case, sophomore year, because I had the scholarship. And that meant after junior year, you're going to go to basic training between junior and senior year. So it's not 6 weeks like for enlisted people, it's 4 weeks, because we've had a lot of the military training through our coursework. And we met every Wednesday for core training. We march, we drill, we do a lot of ceremonial stuff and the like. And the ROTC sponsored a lot of things to increase our, I want to say, sense of coherence, unity, and so forth. We had intramural sports. Our Air Force ROTC would be a participant. I mean, we had guys who were members of fraternities and so forth, and the ROTC would say, well, you can represent your fraternity if you want in this sports event or whatever the competitive event might be, but we don't like it if you don't ever represent us on occasion. And so I wasn't a fraternity guy, so I tended to just say, well, every time we join in something, I'll wear the Air Force shirt, I could say the freshman year, there were lots of guys, and there was also a Navy ROTC on our campus. So you could join the Air Force on the Navy ROTC, and there were lots of cadets that first year, my freshman year, 66. The second year, everything dropped dramatically. It's like, where'd everybody go? And it was the resistance to the war. It was no longer popular. Now, there were not demonstrations on U of L's campus. We were mainly a commuter school. In fact, I remember back at this time where, certainly the colleges up in the Northeast and a lot of other places were starting to erupt into lots of disorder and so forth. U of L was known as a hotbed of apathy. Nobody cared about, we had like 3 members of the SDS, the guys with the long hair. It's like, okay, there's our token red guard. And the rest of the people they didn't care one way or the other. It was like, we're all just relaxing. I think, I don't know, it was funny because there were 10 guys who I graduated with who became very close, and we still are close together. I mean, we're still friends after 50 years. And one of the themes I remember telling everybody when we all went to freshman class together, not at U of L, but spread between U of L and other universities in the East mainly. And I remember telling them, is there an ROTC unit where you're going? Are you going to join now? Because you're going to get swept up. I was telling them, what I believe. They were like, nah. I'm like, well, what are you going to do? So we're just not going to worry about it. And I'm like, well, good luck as an enlisted man when you're going in the jungle. You might want to call me someday. Well, as it all turned out, one by one, they all either drew high numbers in the lottery, so there was no chance they were ever going to go. 1 or 2 had been called up to take the physical, and they failed it for something they never even knew they had. As one guy had a heart murmur, one guy had a bad knee, and so 50 years later, the theme when we get together, which is yearly, is okay, let's count the veterans here, and let's talk about how we're all going to go and who went. Oh, you did it, didn't you, Eric? Yeah, I know. Let's tell the story again. Tell the story about how we're all going to go and how we're all going to be enlisted, man. I said, no, that's all right, But I never regretted it. I never did. I mean, to me, it was like, and I will say too that I feel this to be true, even though they tease me about it. There is, I think, in our culture this sense of people in my generation at this age that, especially the way the nation celebrates veterans, a tinge of pang of, we tease him about it, but, maybe we should have done something too. Now, I'm not saying they should have served or that they think that, but there's something about, I think, and again, it's our culture, it's not every culture, of about saying, well, so, because I'll tease them back. I'm like, about, doing some veteran thing, or I'll argue with them like, you can't talk to me that way, I'm a veteran, and just tease them. Because when I came back, at the end of it, I bought my first house with a VA loan. Air Force paid for my undergraduate school. I actually went and got my master's degree on the GI Bill. It's like the benefits, aside from the pride I have of serving in a unit that rescued people from otherwise certain death, is like I have no regrets about my participation in it at that time, given what we thought we knew and so forth. I don't know, it's just, the other thing I've mentioned, when I came back, my dad had a much more profound, I don't know if respect is the right, he always respected me, and he was a terrific dad, but there was something about me going and coming back and just have served honorably, not medals up to here or anything like that, just I went and did it. And again, amidst the controversy of the war and all the rest of this, that he held me in a certain higher esteem for the rest of his life, just because I did what he had done, in a way, And the rest of his buddies, who were all war veterans from World War I, of course, everybody went there, none of their kids went. And it's like, there was always this point of like, well, at least you went, didn't you? I was like, well, yeah, and no regrets. Although I will say that, when it was time to make the decision, are you going to make a career of the Air Force? Do you want to do this, I pretty much said at the end of my served time, no, I think I've seen enough. The Catch-22 stuff got more and more, I don't know, became more apparent to me, and as my role in, as the war wound down, and it was clear we were going to, enter into an era of peace and so forth, civilian life looked a lot more, I want to say, admirable to me. I like the idea of being in one place, not moving the family all around and so forth. It was fine. It was great, but it was like, no, it's not my cup of tea to stay in for 20 or whatever it might be. And that was fine too, but it was just interesting to me to have had fate deal me the card to say, I'm going to send you to a very different place than you ever imagined, with a very different mission and a whole different experience than you've ever read about. And grace of God, you won't come home physically or mentally terribly messed up like so many poor souls ended up doing from that experience. Right. So there's all manners of way in which I am, thankful for having had the opportunity, and also thankful for having been blessed without any traumatic experience other than what I had to witness there, which was the loss of some crews that I briefed. I mean, the first time I heard about a crew that I'd briefed that morning is gone. It's like, well, what happened to them? We don't know. They just disappeared. And the profoundness of, that had never happened to me. I'd been there 6 months, and every crew I'd briefed, successful mission, came home fine. Every crew I briefed that I can recall, on search and rescues, we got them, we pulled them out. It was close, it was scary. You live this in a way, you're listening to sometimes I go to the command center and listen to the radio chatter about, we got the guy, we're pulling him out, and all this stuff. It's like, this is incredible. I was just briefing these guys an hour ago, and they're facing all this enemy fire and so forth, and I'm like, Oh, Lord God, I hope I told him right. You know? So a lot of it's guesswork. You know, as I say, things were fluid and changing, but that first time a crew did not come back. The profoundness of what happened, they still to this day don't know what happened to them. They just were, they were the trailing helicopter and a pair of helicopters were headed to Cambodia to do some kind of combat support. And at one point, the lead helicopter looks back at the other saying, we're about to make a change. They look back and it's gone. All they see is smoke rising from the jungle. They send in a rescue team. They can't even get close to the wreckage because the fire's so bad. There was no warning. There was no shoots. There were no beepers going off. There was nothing. No, warning from the pilot in back, like, oh my God, something's going on. They were just gone. And, you know, if it blew up in midair, or it may have been hit by some type of anti-aircraft thing that just suddenly blew them out. Nobody heard it or saw it. And to this day, no one really knows what the consequence was. Well, at that time, you know, we didn't know either, and we didn't know it wouldn't be resolved for 50 years. But, you know, as a briefing officer, it's like, did I tell them the right path? Was there something down there that could have been hidden in the jungle, like an anti-aircraft thing that we missed somehow? Mm-hmm. Not necessarily me, but somehow, and it brought that group to their death. And that was the first, but not the last of the experiences I would have where I'd lose a crew member. Or I might not have been the one to brief them beforehand before they went off, but I would know these crew guys because you briefed them daily and you got to know a lot of them. Not, we weren't drinking buddies or anything like that, but you just got to know them.
Sure.
And when you'd hear they're gone, it's like, that can't be true. But, so there is that. And whenever I would go to the Vietnam Wall, I would make sure that I would go to those names of those guys that I, had briefed, or the ones I had known, and honor them. If I had family with me, I'd point them out and say, let me tell you the story of this man, this one. Again, not their life story, but just I knew them, and that's, those aren't just names there. There's people that I saw, and they represent the other 59,000 up here. So,
wow. When you, I guess when you got back home and you eventually got out, what year did you end up getting out of the military?
When I was finished with my tour over there, they sent me to SAC headquarters in Omaha, Nebraska, at Offutt Air Force Base. Mm-hmm. And they put me in charge of there was a big wing of photo intelligence people that were in the basement of SAC headquarters. And what they would do was they would get satellite reconnaissance film delivered to them like on a monthly basis. And this film would come in, highest confidential or highest top security, top secret code word material, and it would come in these huge buckets, film this wide, and again, it looked kind of like massively big negative rolls from Kodak or something, but it was from Kodak, from up in upstate New York, and they'd roll them out on these light tables and peer down, and it would be China, Russia. I mean, satellites were taking pictures of everything, everywhere, all in the world. And we'd get these in, and we constantly were reviewing orders of battle and changes everywhere or anywhere that the Joint Chiefs of Staff wanted, and whatever they wanted, say, find out more about this, that, or the other. And this stuff would come in. Now, I couldn't be a photo interpreter, but what I was put in charge of was the entire wing's top secret security apparatus, as well as the head of the library. We kept these tapes or this film, canisters of film, for several months before it would be destroyed, and so it could be referred to. They'd come and check out a canister, read it, put it back, and we kept 2 or 3 months worth. This is before it could all be digitized and so forth. So it was funny that museum here, one of the big revelations was I actually finally saw one of the satellites that used to puke out one of these things of film that would drop through space, and there was a aircraft that would catch it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's over here too.
Mm-hmm.
The aircraft that catches it, and here's the satellite that took it. I'm like, well, I'll be damned. I always heard about it. Never thought I'd see it. And there it was. And anyhow, so I was in charge of this library and also the sort of enforcing top secret stuff. I mean, it was more like controlling documents that would be moved around within this vaulted area in this huge section of the basement of SAC headquarters. And I did that for 2.5 years, and that's when, in 1974, there was a massive. The war was over, and we signed the peace in '73, a peace treaty. Let a year go past, and the Air Force, and I think the other services as well, said we need a giant reduction in forces. You know, the war's over, we're out, peace is here with us. And they came to me and said, we're going to let you out early, unless you want to become a regular officer. That is to be, I was a reserve officer, and to join the regular side, you know, took some consideration on the Air Force's part as well as the individual to be offered it. And I said, I'm not interested in joining for longer than what I've done. I'm surprised you're going to let me go before my 6 years is up. In fact, we've only done 3.5. They said, that's all right. No harm done. You'll just serve it as inactive reserve. That's okay with you. I'm like, yeah, that's fine with me. Are you sure you want to rip this up? You paid, and by this time I had almost finished my master's degree at Creighton University in Omaha on the GI Bill. I said, you paid for everything I've ever learned. You sure you want to let me go? He goes, hey, we got way too many people. And no problem. I'm like, okay, guys. So that was in June of '74. I had to wait a year because I wasn't done with my master's. By this time I was married. My wife was a teacher in Omaha, or Bellevue, a city right next to the base. And we lived off of her work for that year while I finished up. And then I got into the civil service because there was a big recession in '75. It was interesting. I go out into the civilian world in '75 saying, well, what can I show? I'm an officer, I was in the military, I'm a veteran, and I got ba. And everybody looked at me like, and what's that got to do with us? Well, I mean, you know, I was a commander of people, I organized this, that, and the other, you know, adapted to lots of stuff. You know, I got, you know, not saying I'm a war hero, but there's a lot going on here that, you know, and they were like, I don't mean a thing to us. I mean, the business world said, you know, so? It's like, what should I be? And I said, well, intelligence officer, what the hell is that? And rescuing pilots and all this stuff means nothing to us. So I'm like, well, that's disappointing. So what I did as an ancillary thing was I said, well, you know, I bet because I'm a veteran, I know one group that has to give me some credit for that, and that's the U.S. government. So they give you extra points, so to speak, when you take the test and so forth. So, you know, I take the test, I do very well on it, and then by the time you add my veteran points and whatever stuff they do to advance you as a veteran, well, I'm at the top of the list. It's like, what would you like to be? You know, we have all these openings in the civil service. And I said, well, what have you got? And he said, well, there's a lot in the Defense Department. I said, was there anything in intelligence or anything? No. But there's lots of opportunities. Like, would you like to be the rodent control officer at some air base or army base? Like, is that a thing? Yeah. No. What else you got? Well, okay, patience, let's riffle through the stuff here. And they came up with this one thing that was saying, how would you like to learn how to be a work management analyst and a work specialist that learns how to streamline operations, make things more efficient. In factory settings, that means looking at ways to improve things so things get done faster. In administration, same type of thing, reducing paperwork. How would you like to learn how to do that? It's a 2-year program. I'm like, yeah, okay. They sent me to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, which was not far from Louisville, so I could visit family more frequently. Mm-hmm. It was a 2-year program. Again, massive amounts of training, OJT, formal schooling that the Army did. Now, I'm not an Army, I'm a civilian. I'm targeted for a healthy GS level something. Then when I get out, you can make a good living. Here we go again. After 2 years, they say, I'm done, did very well, top ratings. I said, so where are we going to go? Where are we going to say, we can't stay at Fort Campbell, we're going to put you on some Army base somewhere else. I said, okay, where? And they said, well, there's this place in upstate New York. It's called Watertown, Camp Drum. It's a very old Army base. It's been reduced to a camp because it's so small. I said, and where is that exactly? He said, well, it's pretty far north of Buffalo. I said, well, that sounds forbidding. Tell me a little more about it. Well, they do get a lot of snow. There's not a lot of civilian housing up there. It's remote and pretty grim. I'm like, well, how much snow do they get? And he said, well, last year they had 18 feet. I said, 18 feet of snow? Yeah, and that's kind of normal. And I'm like, well, now wait a minute. What else you got? I was, kind of, this is civilian stuff. He said, well, we got other stuff, but we've selected you for Camp Drum. I said, but now wait a minute. Don't you have like a list of things where candidates might say, if it's all the same to you, I'd rather do this job here or here. And maybe somebody can't wait to be with 18 feet of snow. And the civil service said, well, that's not how we do things around here. I said, but wouldn't it make sense if you had a place like in Atlanta, and you had somebody who you were going to send to Atlanta who says, I hate the South, I'd love to be up north. But do you think that's a better way? I said, it's not your job to question how we do things. I said, I understand that. No, I said, so let me ask you this. What if I said, I'm not going? My wife and I had first newborn baby, first child. The idea of taking this poor thing 18 feet of snow, and I'm a boy from Kentucky, we don't get a foot of snow a year. I said, I can't do it. What's the jail sentence going to be? They said, well, we've trained way too many of you guys for this program anyway, so we're looking to toss a few. If you want to just leave. I said, well, how much is the check I got to write for 2 years worth of training and pay? And they said, it's on us. So here we go again. Like, so you just qualified me for the first time in my life, according to the private sector, of maybe having a saleable skill, and you're just okay with letting me go because I don't want to go to Fort Drum and you've trained too many anyway? They said, yeah, that's about the deal. Okay, there's something about this pattern I'm really starting to like a lot. So we moved to Louisville, and now I've got this paperwork. I got this saleable skill that I've just been trained, and I've got certifications and all this stuff. And I pass it around to factories, General Electric, where my dad works, and several Ford Motor Company has a big place there. It's like, I'm going to get a job somewhere in one of these big manufacturing plants because they're dying for people like this. But as it turned out, my brother-in-law, who worked at an insurance holding company headquarters in Kentucky or in Louisville, said, when I gave him my resume, he said, they need one of those in our bureaucracy, in our headquarters here in Louisville. Maybe you'd fit there. I'd worked at GE before as a summer employee when I was in college. So I knew the manufacturing environment and what that was like. I was okay with that. But I said, well, okay, I'll try it. This holding company, and they had just opened this program that they were going to use for slimming their process of insurance claims and all this stuff. It's a bureaucracy. It's paper instead of metal and the like. So they hired me. I stayed there 20 years. Never did a day's work of what I was trained in. They failed to bring in anything that they thought was a good program that they were going to use me for. So they said, stand by, just do some work in this management analyst area over here, other stuff, till we bring in the right program that we're going to press you into that's going to do this. It never happened. I end up by chance in technology, this new stuff called computers. Just by chance. I mean, pure chance. And I ride that pony for 20 years, 18 of the 20 years, to the land of PCs and local area networks and connecting networks across the nation. And everybody thought I was an electrical engineer. I wasn't. I was a political science major. And then we're like, well, you did this in the service. Did you? No, I was rescuing. I was helping rescue people. You know, I was like, well, how the hell did you end up here? I said, I don't know. I really don't. But it's a living.
Right.
And let me homestead in Louisville, raise my family there. Amongst my wife's family lived there. My parents are there, and sisters and so forth. And so it went. And when that company got bought out by a Dutch insurer, and they said, we're going to move you to Cedar Rapids because we're moving all our computer stuff to Iowa. I said, I've been in the Midwest in Omaha, and I've had quite enough of that. So they said, well, then we're going to let you go. We're going to give you a year's salary, and we're going to, it's like, once again, we're going to, it's like, please give me more punishment like this. And I went off and joined a little .com that was in Louisville for a couple of years, technology type place, and they finally ran out of gas, and then by pure chance was looked up or saw an opportunity to join a nonprofit in Louisville which had just been created to help other nonprofits in their business processes and so forth, help them understand good nonprofit, I would say, standards of doing well, raising money, having good boards do work, but volunteer for, stuff like that. And when I put in my application, I said, I'm telling you up front, I can't even spell nonprofit. I don't know what you guys do, but I do know how to do a lot of stuff based on all that I've spoken to you. The guy says, you're just the guy I'm looking for. I need somebody on my crew, which was only 3 people, who's not been in the nonprofit world, who brings me something for all you've learned in the for-profit world, military, whatever you can come in and adapt to the nonprofit world, planning, organizing, all this stuff you've learned, bring it. And I'll teach you nonprofit stuff. I'll teach you the language. I'm like, great. I still do that to this day. I officially retired 3 years ago, or 6 years ago, but I wrote 2 books on nonprofits, as a matter of fact, before I retired. And then I still do occasional contract work for that same group, to just because I can, and I dearly believe in what they do and open my eyes to a whole different world, even though I'm going to say, as far as making a living, by this time, my kids are grown, my obligations to my family and so forth have diminished to where I don't need a big salary. My first wife passed away 22 years ago. This was at the same juncture that all this other stuff happened. The company I was working for got sold, and it was a horrible year. But subsequently, the apex of my career, aside from the Air Force, which is, it stands in a league of its own, was working in the nonprofit field, seeing what people are attempting to do to help the community in so many ways, so much energy, so much devotion to it, and what little I could do to give them a hand. To me, it's like, well, here I am again, advising people, like I was advising the pilots. Here's the path you need to take. And here I am doing it with nonprofits. Same idea. I am not the pilot, but I have the gift of helping them understand the right way to go, and if I'm doing my job right, they're successful. And just like the Air Force, if I do it right, mission accomplished, they get home safe. So it's like this. There's this deeper circle of, as I sit back now in the evening of life, so that's how this all worked out. Who knew?
Mm.
So.
Wow, that's so great. That's awesome. So you've retired, semi-retired, I guess at this point. Now, are you involved with any veteran organizations?
Never have been. Not until this group came into my consciousness via Facebook. I had lost all contact with everybody I served with, except for one individual. Well, actually two. One happened to call me just out of the blue 20-something years ago, and I was headed out to a training in San Francisco, and he was in San Francisco. I said, I'll meet you there. And he and I, at this point, we hadn't seen each other in, about 18 years or thereabout. Well, let me think, 72 to 97. So, yeah, a good while. And we said we're going to keep in contact with one another. Well, that all went the way of the warrior. And then one other guy who I knew found my name somewhere in Air Force Times or something. I'd submitted something once. I think I was looking for people, saying, is there anybody out there from NKP served in this at time? I want to try to get together. And one guy saw it and called me, and we corresponded for a while, and then that all just faded away. Mm-hmm. And ever since then, as far as I know, they may all be in glory land. I really don't know. Till this came up as a Facebook entry, I thought, well, maybe somebody from my unit will join this group. In the meantime, it's lots of guys who served in different ways, and I'm ready to hook up with them and see what happens. And that was 7 or 8 years ago. And so when it came to this, when we came to this opportunity, it's like, I'm going. I mean, yeah. I'm going. Even if I don't know a soul there that I served with, we have the common bond of having been there,
right,
and having served the ultimate mission of the wing in our own ways. And it'd be really cool to. I've never met anybody in maintenance or security police or all these other guys that I'm talking to. It's like, so tell me about what, not just your experience there, but what did you do?
Right.
To help the same way I was. We're all helping the pilots be successful. So it's a miraculous, wondrous thing to be a part of, and to reawaken in me what terms I haven't heard in so many years, and know that I didn't make this up. Some of the stuff, like, remember this, something about the Thai culture or that area, like, oh my God, that's right. And it's like, I didn't make this up. After a while, 50 years, it's like, did that really happen?
Right.
I really experience it that way. And then I hear these guys are like, by God, that's right. There's something to that. But to answer your question more directly, I never joined the VA, the veterans. Well, I did join the Vietnam Vets of America for a few years, the VVA. But I'd never joined a VA group in Louisville or Veteran of Foreign Wars or American Legion. Just, to me, it was like, no, I don't, most of them were dominated by World War II, Korean War guys. I don't know how many Vietnam vets, having had their experience, were like, let's do this. So this was my first big commitment to, to doing this. And I've been pretty active on the Facebook page, sending a picture or commenting or something. I felt a connection to them through that social media. Thank God for social media.
Yeah, for real.
Yeah.
That's awesome. All right, so we're kind of wrapping up here. I just got a couple more questions for you. One is, and which I believe you touched on this quite a bit, but just want to talk a little bit more, just kind of getting some direct answers from you out of this one. But what are some of the traits or lessons that you learned during your military experience that you could directly apply to your life?
Well, I'd say there's the discipline that the military has, that the order to it, a sense of duty and loyalty to an idea and to a unit. I don't think I've ever been with a group that has been so well devoted to one another as my group was at NKP, to that professionalism of our, not just to the briefing officers, but the support group, the guys who did the debriefs, the guys who prepared the maps that we'd get to pilots, all the whole unit that did all these different types of jobs. There was a coherence and a faithfulness to that I never did witness in that intensity again. And I've always used that as sort of an example to myself of saying, when I'm advising people about how good teams cohere, what their characteristics are, I will draw upon what I witnessed in my military career. I think the professionalism, as it would be expressed by people that I thought had very high integrity, of a lot of my commanders and so forth, was stellar stuff, and I hope particularly the bravery of those guys who I would brief, who would go up and put their lives on the line every night or day, is like, I stood in awe of them then, and I do even now. I mean, it's like those guys, I mean, my God, my role compared to that is, so tiny, but important to them. But it's like, oh, I remember, again, going back to Catch-22, one of the scenes in there is the briefing officer, because people would ask me, well, what did you do? And I would say, if you've ever seen a World War II thing where the guy's pointing the targets out to the guys who are going to bomb Germany, but he's not going with them. He's just saying, now you go in here and you bomb them and then you come back this way. I said, that's me. And we're like, that guy was usually a jerk. I said, yeah, no tell. Because why? Because he'd say, whew, I don't know how you're going to get out of this one, folks, but I ain't going. It's like, how do you portray this? How do you do this in real life without looking like a jerk, so to speak? Other than, I want to say, building their trust in you, to say, I know you're in my corner. That when you speak, I know it's the closest thing to truth we're going to get, because you're doing your job right. Mm-hmm. And therefore I'm relying upon you. I'm putting my life in your hands for this. And to me, it's like, this is my expression of what, the greatness of all those other guys who, again, put their life on the line. It's like, let me do my part to see that you get back safely, and you do you, so to speak, in the role that you play. And to this day, my reflection on the people whose names on the wall. And the last time I went up there, and I've been there a number of times because I love, traveling to Washington, D.C. and some of my grandchildren up there this last time, and I'm trying to describe to them, and there's other vets that are up there who have seen a lot worse than I have, but I'm just, can barely get through telling the story to them. It's just like, not me, them, this, let me tell you why that name's up there. What I knew about how these guys put themselves, in harm's way daily to try to, do what they were told to do. And so there's that, I think, too. I've never seen anyone go to that length in, civilian life, other than maybe firemen and policemen, first responders, as we call them now, who we honor so deeply. So that, to me, is, they're those heroes, literally, fighting for what we thought was the right thing to do in that part of the world in that era. You know, this Ronald Reagan quote from one of his monologues was, "Where do we get those men? You know, where do they come from? Those who, the nobility and bravery and all." It's like, I don't know, but I was there to witness it, and I'm proud that I was, and I'm proud that I did what I could to support them in that.
Mm. That's awesome. Last question for you. Where this is going to the Library of Congress, it has the potential to be viewed by several generations of people. So with that being the fact, what message would you like to leave for future generations?
Well, I think there is. It occurred to me while I was in the museum today, and looking at all the generations of aircraft that we've built, the enormity of the money we've spent in defending, our freedom and our role in the 20th century to stand up against oppression, tyranny, dictatorships, and the like. And the enormity of the cost of money, treasure, lives, and the like, and the success that we enjoyed to a point. I think we still need a sense of responsibility as citizens to say, how do we gird ourselves to defend our principles and so forth, but also at the same time, I do worry and wonder, as Eisenhower warned us when he left office in 1960 about the military-industrial complex and how it can overwhelm, and corrupt in a way a nation to the point where you're not even aware of it, and therefore be on guard. It's not that we can't and shouldn't think about how we defend ourselves and all that we stand for, but at the same time, I am cautious about how we as a nation have maybe overstepped and gone too far into a militarized society that is having chickens come to roost as we face other priorities that we think we need to face as a nation and so forth. So it's a balance. I read a book once years ago about saying the United States could have already become like Prussia, which was the northern state that became the dominant state of what became Germany. But the Prussians were the ones who were the military masters that helped unite Germany and then conquer all of Europe, almost once or twice. And how the Prussianization of Germany, which came to a point where it's like a fish swimming in its own water, not aware of its own environment. How sometimes I wonder if that might have happened to the United States. And not that I don't want to, take the honor of veterans and so forth, but there's a certain amount of, too much devotion or too much money being spent and so forth. We are, the prioritization is my concern about how much money and treasure we put in this. And the secondary part is the professionalization of the military to a point where I grew up in a generation where there was an expectation that we all might be summoned at some point to defend the nation. That's gone away into now as a volunteer force into a way that's disconnected the sacrifice from the general population. And therefore, when we make a decision to go to war, so to speak, where does that lie in terms of saying, yeah, let's do that? because it's the excuse me, the underclass that would be likely put into the military, or excuse me, be the ones who would be serving versus we're all going to have to sacrifice.
All right. Well, do you feel that there's anything that may have been left out that you would like to add to this video?
No, I'd have a tendency to go on and on, so I think I'll leave it at that.
No, you're doing just fine. All right. Well, with that, this concludes the interview of Eric Schmall, right? Yeah. I remembered it there. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your service.
Certainly.